Hello, grantees. Remember to turn on your cameras if it's possible so we can see you. Thank you. All right, so today we have a great session. All right, we have recommendation letters for applying to graduate school. Okay, but we will also be talking in general, no? So the undergraduate would also be able to apply this to their own letters of recommendation. Okay, so today we have Maria Hernandez and Elizabeth Spark. Okay, and well, the floor is yours, Maria. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana Lucia, and hi, grantees. I have the pleasure to talk with you in the last couple of weeks, so it's great to see you again. So I am introducing Elizabeth Spark. She's Assistant Dean of Admissions and Enrollment at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So this is one of the three universities within the University of Illinois system, which I represent here in Mexico. So the floor is yours, Beth. Thank you so much for being the speaker of this session.
Sure. So hi everyone. As Mary mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Spark, and I'm here at the Urbana campus for the University of Illinois. I work in the graduate college and oversee graduate admissions. And I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about a topic that, despite being a cornerstone really of the admissions process, it doesn't always get a lot of the attention or the strategy it deserves, which is letters of recommendation. Now, I know that most of you here today are students, but there are some pieces in this session that are also presented in a way that's really for your letter writers. And so you'll be able to kind of talk about this information with your letter writers as well. Today, my hope is that you will walk away with tools and clarity and a little bit of confidence about the process of letters of recommendation. Now, in my role, so I've been at the university for a little over 20 years working in grad admissions, and I have read hundreds, probably thousands of recommendation letters, and I've seen the full spectrum. From letters that move a committee to take a second look at a marginal applicant, to letters that unintentionally hold a strong candidate back. So there really is a lot of power in this process. So here's what we will cover in our time today. First, we're going to talk about why do these letters matter so much? Why do they carry as much weight as they do? Next, we're going to talk about what separates a strong and memorable letter from a vague or forgettable one. Then we'll look at things from your side, how to choose the right recommenders and how to support them effectively. After that, I'll flip the script a little and talk about some information for letter writers about what makes a letter powerful and persuasive. I'm going to go over some common mistakes from both sides because they are quite common, and we want to make sure that you know also what not to do. And then we'll run through some frequently asked questions that come up all the time. And finally, I want to leave you with some tips and takeaways, and then we'll open it up for kind of a question and answer session. My goal is to make this feel useful and not overwhelming. So even if you leave with just 2 or 3 new insights today, you're in great shape. So jumping in, I want to start by kind of zooming out a little bit and talking about the bigger picture of why do letters of recommendation matter. When graduate admissions committees review applications, they're not just looking for someone who can succeed academically. They are looking for someone who's ready for the demands of advanced study, someone who can thrive in a research or professional environment, and someone who will contribute meaningfully to their cohort and to the community. Letters of recommendation really help fill in the story. They offer context for what your GPA or your resume does not show. They provide a narrative about your journey, your growth, your turning points. They talk about your character, how you operate in collaborative settings, how you bounce back from failure. And they provide some clarity about the fit between you and the program you're applying to. You want to think of your application as a portfolio of evidence about who you are and what you can do. Your transcript is going to show what you've accomplished. Your resume is going to show what you've done. And your statement of purpose is going to show your goals and your voice. Letters of recommendation are the lens through which others can sort of validate your story. They provide context, credibility, and a perspective that really no other document can convey on its own. In competitive programs, these letters often become the differentiator, especially when the rest of the application pool is equally qualified on paper. So what does a strong letter look like? The best ones share a few key qualities. They're specific. They name actual projects or papers or turning points. They provide context. Why was the student's performance impressive? What challenges did they face? They are tailored, meaning you can tell the recommender knows what kind of program that you're applying to. And perhaps most importantly, they're confident. You can almost feel it when a letter writer is holding back using sort of lukewarm phrases like adequate or somewhat capable. Committees will pick up on this. But when a recommender writes, I have no doubt that she will excel in graduate school, that confidence resonates with them. Let's talk about sort of two examples. One letter might say, she's hardworking, bright, and a pleasure to have in class. But that could describe a dozen students. Versus someone who says, in a seminar of 20 students, she consistently led discussions with insight and intellectual curiosity. Her final paper, and then listing what it was about, was among the top 3 I received that year. So the first one is sort of polite, but it's vague, right? Versus the second one is more specific. And it could be talking about the same student, but a world of difference in terms of credibility and impact. Now let's shift our focus to talk about some guidance for you. The biggest one is choosing the right recommender. It's a very important piece of your application process, and it's one you're going to need to start the earliest. Choosing the right recommenders, it's not about the popularity or the prestige of that recommender. It's about their proximity and their perspective about you. So you want someone who knows your work firsthand, who can speak to your strengths and use examples to demonstrate those strengths, and who understands the type of program you're applying to. So you want someone who has credibility, such as a faculty member or some other professional in that field. I often get asked things like, should I ask Professor X, who's famous in the field, or Professor Y, who knows me really well, but is newer? And my answer is going to be to go with Professor Y. A personalized, a detailed letter from someone who really knows you is always better than a vague one from someone that just has name recognition every single time. You think of people who have seen you grow, maybe they've seen you struggle, and maybe they've seen you ultimately succeed. Those are going to be your most powerful advocates in the admissions process. Now, once you've chosen your recommenders, the next step is to think about how you ask them to be a recommender. It's not just a formality. The way you ask is going to set the tone for the whole process. So I want to break it down. First off, as I mentioned, you need to start early, ideally 4 to 6 weeks ahead of your application deadline, or more if you're applying in the fall when faculty are the busiest. You want to think about timing. October and November are sort of midterm sessions, hiring season, conference season. You don't want your request getting lost in their email pile. You also want to be respectful and specific in your request. One of the most powerful things you can do is to use the phrase, would you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter of recommendation for X program? This gives them a chance to say no gracefully if they don't feel like they can write you a strong letter, because what you really need is a strong letter, not just a letter. And many faculty will say, sure, I'll write you a letter, and it'll be nice and big. You want someone who can truly give you a strong letter. It's going to be better for everyone involved. When they say yes, you need to support them. You need to provide them with what I like to call a recommendation packet which should include a copy of your resume or CV, a draft of your personal statement, or at least a summary of your goals, details about the program you're applying to, including what is the deadline, how are they going to submit it, is that going to be in an online portal, is it going to be via email, any other information about that school or program that they might need to know. And then what I really want you to think about doing is giving them a few bullet points of accomplishments or moments that you really want them to highlight. And it might be something that they should know about, but they might have forgotten because they work with hundreds of students. And so you want to highlight those things for them so that they know to bring that up. So for example, you might say something like, you might remember I was the lead on our research team's analysis of X data. That's something I'd love for the committee to see, right? And so you're kind of reminding them of some specific examples where you did something really great and you would like them to mention it. The biggest thing is I don't want you to underestimate how busy faculty are, especially around application season. If you're asking someone to write you a letter, there might be 30 other students also asking that same faculty member. So you want to give them as much time and as much information as you can. Basically, anything you can do to make their job easier increases your chance of getting a great letter. Now, something that's optional, but I like to encourage, is for you to set up a meeting with them. Asking them if you can sit down for a 15 or 20-minute chat, it can really help sort of spark stronger examples, clarify your goals, and leave them with a better sense of what to say. Right? So if you go and you have this conversation with them and you really talk through it with them, it's going to make it easier for them to write. And of course, something that's also really important is to thank them. Thank them early and often. So a quick thank you email when they agree, maybe a reminder near the application deadline, and a follow-up when it's submitted, once your application's fully, or the recommendation letters are submitted. And if you get in, if you get admitted, let them know. That's, there's really nothing better for a faculty member than seeing a former student succeed. So if you get into grad school, tell them they helped you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some information really that is for letter writers that you can share. So you might be wondering what should be included in a recommendation letter, or how can they avoid writing something that's flat or forgettable? And so here's kind of a reliable structure. In the opening, you want them to identify who they are, what is their role, and how do they know you. They should include the length of time and setting. So for something like, I've known Elizabeth for 2 years as a student in 2 of my upper level psychology classes at the University of Illinois. That really tells them specifically how they know you, how long they've known you. Also in the beginning, they should establish their credibility to speak on their behalf. So for an example, they could say something like, as a senior lecturer who has taught over 1,000 undergraduates in this field, I can confidently say, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of letting them know that they are someone who is credible to speak on a student's ability to do well in a graduate program. Then we get to the body of the letter. This is where the heart is of the letter. Here's where they're going to focus on your skills, such as writing, analysis, technical abilities, communication, and research skills. You're going to also want them to talk about your traits, such as initiative, creativity, reliability, collaboration, intellectual curiosity. And you want them to use specific anecdotes or stories that really bring those skills and traits to life. So for example, they might say something like, in my seminar, Elizabeth tackled one of the most challenging topics, and then state what that specific topic was, and not only produced an exceptional paper, but helped guide peers through discussion and with clarity and grace, right? So it's really just kind of giving a strong example of your skills and traits there. And if possible, having them talk about any progress you made. So committees really love to see growth. So something they might say is, I've watched her evolve from a hesitant participant into a confident presenter. Anything that they can do to show how you've grown over the semester that you had them as a faculty member or over the 2 years that they've known you, those sorts of things are very helpful. If they can, includes a bit of comparison or context, so helping the reader understand basically how you stack up. So they could use phrases like, I would rank this student among the top 10% of students I've taught in my 15 years, or this student is one of only 2 undergraduates I've invited to join my research team this year. Something that is sort of making you stand out as a top student in your recommender's mind. And then finally, the conclusion is where they really need to offer a clear endorsement. Something like, I give him my highest recommendation for your doctoral program in sociology. What we don't want to see is things like, I think he would do well given the right support. We want to see a strong endorsement. And of course, usually recommenders will offer to be contacted if the committee wants more information. So you want to think of this letter as really a tool to open a door for you. And so, really talking with your recommender about the importance of spending that extra time to include those extra details. Some other best practices that can sort of elevate your letter. So we want faculty to be honest, but err on the side of supportive. So they should avoid words like adequate, okay, or average. These can read as red flags, even if unintentional. They should focus on the how, not just the what. So don't just say they wrote a great paper. We need to explain how they approached the topic, what made it stand out, how they handled feedback. And then, of course, tailor the letter if they can. So if a student is applying to, let's say, a research intensive program, highlight their research potential. Sorry. And if it's a professional program, focus maybe on your leadership, communication skills, things like that. We really want them to avoid the dreaded form letter. So admissions readers can spot recycled one-size-fits-all letters instantly, and they do not like them, and they do not help applicants stand out. And then one other piece of advice that we like to give faculty are to watch for implicit bias. So research shows that sometimes letters for women and underrepresented students are more likely to focus on personality, like she's so nice or she's so sweet, rather than ability, like she's brilliant. And so they need to be aware of their word choices and where they place emphasis. And then, of course, we ask all faculty to respect confidentiality. They shouldn't share your letter with others without your permission. So now I want to talk about some common mistakes, because knowing what not to do can be just as helpful as knowing what to do, right? So for applicants, one of the biggest mistakes we see are waiting too long to ask, leaving your recommender stressed and rushed. So if you ask your letter writer to write a letter for you a week or 2 before the deadline, that is not good. You need to give them as much time as you can. And then choosing the wrong person, someone who does not actually know you all that well. Even if they themselves, you might think that faculty member is really impressive. And so to get a letter from that faculty member means you must be a great student. But if that faculty member doesn't know you all that well and can't provide concrete examples, they're not actually your best letter writer. Failing to provide them with support materials. So as I mentioned, that packet of giving them your CV, your personal statement, your goals, talking with them about what you want them to write, that is very important. And assuming that a good grade equals a good letter. So just because you got a great letter or a great grade in their class doesn't mean it's going to give you the best letter. So they might think highly of you as a student, but still not have enough substance to really write a detailed letter. Now for letter writers, the common mistakes we see are sort of generic or overly short letters. So if their letter is, for example, under half a page, that's going to be a red flag for admissions committees. Getting the program or the applicant name wrong. We see that sometimes, especially when students might ask recommenders to write letters for multiple institutions or multiple degree programs, it's important to make sure that faculty understand that they're going to have to issue two slightly different letters, even if it's just replacing the name, right? And so, for example, I've seen letters where they say, we're recommending this student for the MBA program at Purdue University, when really they're applying for a PhD program here at the University of Illinois, right? And that's going to hurt the applicant quite a bit. Focusing too much on likability. So again, talking about a student being nice, that's great, but it's not enough to recommend them for graduate level work. And ignoring red flags or gaps. So this is an important piece for you to know as well. So if there's something concerning on your transcript, maybe you have a course or two that you didn't do the best on, maybe your GPA is slightly lower, maybe you are lacking in some sort of experience. It's okay for faculty to address that. And in fact, addressing it briefly but constructively is good to do. So if you have a slightly lower GPA, for example, they could address that and they could say, you know, despite the student having some struggles in this class or that, we've seen them grow here. This is why we believe that they will do well in your program. So avoiding those issues and not talking about them is not as good as actually just addressing them. Now let's move into some frequently asked questions. These are things that come up all the time, and I hope that they answer some of your questions you might already be thinking about. So the first one is, can I read my own letters? Usually no, unless the faculty member gives you a copy of it, which some faculty will do, but most of them don't. Most schools and online application systems, when you are going into your application, you're going to be filling out, okay, my recommender is this person, they're at this school, this is their email address. And then it's going to ask you whether or not you want to waive your right to view that letter in the future. And by waiving your right to view that letter, it makes the letter more credible in the eyes of the admissions committee. If you don't waive your right, which is a choice, but it can raise questions about whether or not that letter is fully candid. And in fact, some faculty will refuse to write a letter for you if you don't waive that right. So it is ultimately your choice, and it's, you know, but a faculty, it's their choice to not write that letter as well. And it's not that it's personal, it's about sort of preserving the integrity of that process. And speaking of this right to view, this is one of the biggest questions I get is, how does that work? So this right to view your letter, it's part of a larger policy called FERPA. It's a federal policy here in the US that grants students access to their student records when they're enrolled, meaning that once you become a student here, you can have access to all of your student records, including your application record. But the key word is enrolled. So if you choose to not waive your rights, meaning you could view them one day, but you aren't admitted, or you are admitted but you don't enroll, you actually don't have the right to view those letters, even if you didn't waive them. So the right to view those letters and view your application record kicks in once you've been admitted, you've enrolled, and the term has begun. So if you get denied, for example, you can't ask, but they're going to tell you, no, you can't see your letters. Another question I get, of course, is how many letters do you need? So most grad programs are going to require 2 to 3 letters, most commonly 3. Some programs might specify who they want, like 1 academic and 1 professional. So it's really important to check out those program websites to make sure that you are carefully picking your recommenders. A point that I'd like to bring up here is it's very important not to include what I would call personal references, such as letters from family members or friends of family members, even if those friends are well known. Personal letters are not considered professional, and they often create a negative impact on the overall review of your application. Another question we get is, well, what if I don't have strong academic recommenders? I don't have a lot of strong relationships with faculty who can write me letters. I've worked with many adult learners, many career changers, many first-generation students who just don't have those strong ties to faculty, and that's okay. The key is to find someone who can vouch for your critical thinking, your ability to take the initiative, and your readiness overall for grad level work. And then you can use your personal statement to explain your academic potential and the journey that sort of brought you here. A few more questions that we see. One is, can I reuse letters for multiple programs? Yes, of course you can. And in fact, most recommenders are used to providing the same letter to multiple programs or multiple institutions. However, if a program is unique, like a research-heavy PhD or a specific interdisciplinary degree, it's worth giving your recommender a short note about what to emphasize in each letter. And again, as I brought up before, making sure that if they are writing letters for multiple schools, that they are changing the name of that school in that letter. So if I'm saying I'm recommending you for the University of Illinois and you're applying to Illinois and let's say Purdue, you need to make sure those letters have the right school names in them. How do you follow up with recommenders? So a lot of times, you ask a person to write a letter, they say yes, it's been a few weeks, they haven't done it, you start getting nervous. After they agree, it's totally appropriate to check in with them, especially if they haven't done it, with just a few weeks left before the deadline. And after the deadline passes, you always want to send a thank you note, as I mentioned before. Even an email, a short email goes a long way. And again, if you get into the program, let them know. That feedback is really rewarding for your letter writers. And finally, I get the question of, do all of my letters have to be academic letters, meaning from faculty? And not always. So while most grad programs prefer at least 1 or 2 academic letters from faculty, it is okay to include a professional or community-based recommender if they can speak to your intellectual ability, your leadership skills, or your research potential, especially if you've been out of school for a while. If you are applying to a professional master's program, such as an MBA, professional letters might actually be preferred over academic letters. So it really will vary on the program that you're applying to, but ultimately with your letters, you just want someone who could talk about your ability to thrive in grad school, your ability to, do research and to be, sort of someone who can help their peers and be a good contributor to their cohort. I want to sort of end with giving you sort of a set of takeaways that you can actually use. And some of these are for applicants and some of these are for letter writers, but for applicants, build those relationships early. So a great letter doesn't come from just one good semester. It comes from being present and engaged and memorable over time. Ask thoughtfully. Don't just say, can you write me a letter? Ask if they can write you a strong and specific letter, because that will make all the difference. Support your recommenders. The more you give them, like your resume, your goals, your timeline, the better that they can advocate for you. You want to think of your letters as part of your application story. The best letters reinforce and extend what you've already said in your statements, what's already been shown on your resumes and your transcripts, but they don't repeat it or contradict it, right? So it's really sort of reinforcing what you've done. For letter writers, we want them to say more than just, they're great. Instead, we want them to show it and use real examples, describe the work and speak to the impact. Think beyond the classroom. How did the student grow and lead? How did they contribute to the community? Letters that go beyond grades are the ones that really stick. We want to encourage letter writers to not be afraid to advocate for students. Committees really want to hear that the letter writer really believes in you. And if they do, they need to say it very clearly. And of course, to be mindful of tone and language and avoid sort of coded language, especially around gender or race or personality. We want them to highlight ability and not just likability. Some final thoughts are just, a strong letter doesn't just say that you're qualified. It makes the case, again, and I know I've said it a couple of times now, but it makes the case that you will thrive. That's something that's very important to admission committees. Your letter might be one of dozens a committee member is going to read in a given day. So being specific and sincere and structured are really the best tools. And finally, so whether it's you requesting a letter or someone who's writing you one, remember that this process is built on trust between you and that faculty member, or you and your letter writer. It should be taken very seriously. And remember that as you as applicants want to take care of the people who are helping you get where you want to go. So the best recommendation letters, they're not just endorsements, they are stories of potential. And I'm hopeful that today that some of these tools we've talked about will help you obtain letters that can tell your stories and tell them well. At this point, I'd love to open it up to questions and discussion. You know, if you're an applicant, you know, I want to hear what's your biggest concern around asking for letters. If there are any letter writers in the room, of course, I'd love to hear what you think makes it easier or hard to write a strong one, but I'm open to any questions you might have. I will do my very best to answer them.
Thank you, Beth. We don't have questions in the chat, but I'm not sure if the grantees want to open their microphones or they would like to type them in the chat. Or I'm assuming that they already have it. Or they already have their letters. I don't know. Okay. We do have one in the chat. I'm not sure if you would like to read it and then answer it.
Yeah,
Or...
so it says, considering that we are going to apply to more than one university, how much does it affect not mentioning specific details in the recommendation letter, making it a little more general so that it can be used in more than one application? So for example, saying, you know, I recommend the student for your institution instead of the name of the university, or not mentioning the specific program, what it's related to. I think it's okay, depending on how they're writing their letter. So for example, if you are applying to the computer science PhD program at multiple institutions, right? So you're applying to the same program essentially, but at different schools. Then I think that, you know, talking in general about how they believe you will do well in a graduate program in computer science, I think that that would be fine to not mention specific university or even specifically PhD per se. But if you are applying to, let me try to find a good example. If you are applying to, let's say, a statistics master's degree, as well as a mathematics master's degree, because those are two separate majors, sometimes you might need to be a little more specific in those letters. And so faculty in general, I think, you know, I don't think they per se mind writing a letter that says, you know, mathematics MS, University of Illinois, and then quickly editing that to say statistics MS, Purdue University. So, you know, I think it just kind of depends on what you're doing. But, you know, even if it does just say, I'm recommending the student for admission to your institution, and you don't list the institution name, that is okay. As long as they're being specific about you and what you can do and why they believe that you will do well in graduate school, I think that that is okay. Obviously, the more specific it can be, the better. But I don't think that will hurt you. The next question is, would you advise using the same recommenders for both scholarships and admission committees? So generally, for graduate school at least, at the University of Illinois and at our sort of peer institutions, typically your application for admission is the same set of materials for applying for scholarships and other funding opportunities, right? So when a department or a program is deciding whether or not to admit you, and also whether or not to give you a scholarship or to give you an assistantship or a fellowship, typically they are just using your application packet. And so whatever letters were in there are being used for both purposes. It's usually not a separate process. I think at the undergraduate level, sometimes it is. And so I think that's okay to use the same letter, but you might want them to tailor it a little bit if it is a separate process. Now, I will say sometimes when applying on applications, it might ask you if you're interested in applying for funding in general or for these specific funding opportunities. And they might ask you to write a separate essay specifically for that scholarship, and that's okay. But in terms of the letters at the graduate level, it's rare to need separate reference letters for that. But I do know at the undergraduate level, sometimes that happens, that it's okay to use the same. It's just maybe giving them a heads up that, you know, this letter is also going to be needed for this scholarship. And so if need be, it might need to be tailored a little bit. So. Any other questions? Yeah, okay. Can I ask for a letter from a PhD student I've collaborated with in my lab, or should I focus only on faculty? I would not. I would not unless you have to. The letter from the faculty member is going to go a lot further for you than a PhD student. You know, unless that PhD student was your supervisor, which happens, right? So sometimes that PhD student might be on a research assistantship in that lab. And, you know, if you're sort of, let's say, an undergrad researcher, sometimes those research assistants are sometimes in charge of you. And so if that's the case, I do think that's okay. But if they're just more of a peer that you've worked with in the lab, then I would not recommend that. Letters from postdocs are fine. Yeah, those are great. I mean, they're basically faculty in many people's eyes. So I definitely think that postdocs are perfectly fine to write letters for you. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, if not, that's okay. Oh, one more. Okay. If a person used to be my superior or coordinator at work as a teacher, but she's not working in the area anymore, would you consider it appropriate to request a letter from this person? Yeah. So, you know, if they, you know, that happens, right? You know, you're going to have, you know, professional references who have changed jobs, but they were your, you know, person when you were at that organization or university or whatever it is. And so I think that's completely appropriate. You know, I think that what they will need to do. So one thing to know about letters is that when people are writing letters of reference and they're uploading them, what universities are going to look for is that it's on some sort of letterhead paper, right? Not just like a plain Word document, because then they worry about, you know, students sort of forging letters and things like that. So if it's on some sort of letterhead, and if that person no longer works for that place, then their letterhead is going to be different, right? And so when they're talking about who they are and how they know you, they're just going to make sure they know to address the fact that they used to be here and they have this role with you. They've changed their own personal situation, but they're writing about the time that they worked with you. And I think that's perfectly fine. It's just important to make sure they understand to address it when they're writing their letter. Yeah.
All right. So I think that's pretty much it. Okay. But if they have any questions in the future, they can contact you through us, right?
Of course, yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you want to reach out, you know, to Miriam, you know, she can get you in touch with me. And, what I will say is that, through your application process, it is, if you are concerned about something or something is unclear on a program's website, it is always okay to reach out to that program and ask a question. It's much better to ask than not ask. We get thousands of questions a day from applicants. It's okay. That's what we're here to do, is to answer those. And a lot of times, so at the University of Illinois, something to just kind of know about the graduate school application process in general is that it tends to be what we like to call decentralized, meaning that the program that you're applying to has a lot of authority over that admission and the process. So, for example, if you're applying to computer science PhD program, just as an example, what's going to happen is you're going to submit that application, and then computer science and their faculty and their admissions committees, they're going to review you first, right? And so at Illinois, for example, we have sort of a set of basic minimum requirements for admission to the graduate college, to the university. But computer science may have additional or higher level requirements. And so they're going to review you first. And only the students that they want to admit are then going to get referred over to my office in the Central Graduate School to admit you to the university. And so a lot of times the questions you may have are going to be best answered. They're going to be best advised by that program you're applying to. And so it's very important to fully review that program's website and not just the Central Grad School website. You're probably going to have to apply on the Central Grad School website. But a lot of the sort of specific requirements and things that program is looking for, you're going to find on that program website. And it's okay to reach out to them. It's okay to reach out to the Central Grad School too. We'll answer what we can. And if there's something that we feel like the program would do a better job at answering, we'll get you in touch with the appropriate person. And that's good. You're going to find that to be a very similar process at other big schools like Illinois. So if you're applying to our peers, that's okay. But if you're applying to our peers, they're going to have a pretty similar process as we do. Some of them are going to vary from time to time, but you'll find that to be a pretty common practice in the US. But I do appreciate you joining in today and listening to me go on and on about letters. I hope it was helpful. And again, if you think up any questions, never hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to answer and try to give you some guidance. If you are applying for fall 2026, applications are open. And most grad programs have deadlines in December and January. They do vary by program and by institution, so you want to check those out. And so if you are in that process, now is the time that you really want to start figuring out who your letter writers are, start having conversations with them, and start planning to ask them. So that's something important to know.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Beth and Mariam, for your time and knowledge. And we will hope to see you very soon for another webinar session. All right. Thank you, grantees, for joining us, and recommenders, some of them in the crowd. And we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. See you.